You eat it with breakfast, you grab it for lunch. You don't even think about it anymore. Bread is so deeply woven into American life that questioning it feels almost un-American. But here's what almost nobody is talking about. What's actually happening inside your gut every single time you eat a slice of modern bread. And I'm not talking about gluten. Most people have been focused on the wrong thing entirely. There's a compound in today's bread that didn't exist in your grandparents' version, and scientists are only now beginning to understand what it's quietly doing to your digestive system. Stick with me, because by the end of this, the way you look at a loaf of bread will never be the same. Here's the thing about the gluten conversation. It exploded in American diet culture, spawned $1 billion industry, and made millions of people feel like bread was basically poison. But the vast majority of people who avoid gluten don't actually have celiac disease. In fact, less than 1% of the US population does. So why do so many people report feeling bloated, foggy, and sluggish after eating bread? The answer isn't as simple as gluten bad. The real story is far more interesting, and it starts with how modern wheat was re-engineered quietly about 50 years ago. To understand what bread does to your gut, you first have to understand what modern bread actually is, because it's not the same food your great-grandmother baked. Starting in the 1960s and accelerating through the 1980s, wheat was selectively hybridized to produce higher yields, grow faster, and resist pests. The result was a short-stalked, high-gluten wheat that bears almost no resemblance to ancient varieties like einkorn or emmer. This new wheat contains significantly higher levels of a specific protein called gliadin, a subcomponent of gluten. Gliadin is the piece that researchers are now paying close attention to. On top of that, commercial bread making stripped away the slow fermentation process. Traditional bread was made with sourdough cultures, natural bacteria that spent hours, sometimes days, breaking down the grain. That fermentation process pre-digested many of the compounds your gut would otherwise have to deal with on its own. Modern commercial bread skips almost all of that. It goes from flour to shelf in a matter of hours, using fast-acting commercial yeast. What's left behind are intact phytic acids, higher gliadin levels, and a digestive challenge your gut lining was never quite designed to handle at this pace and this frequency. So what actually happens when you eat bread every single day? Let's walk through it. In the first 24 hours, the effects are mostly mechanical. Bread, especially refined white bread, breaks down into glucose rapidly. The starch in a single slice of white bread can spike your blood sugar faster than a tablespoon of pure table sugar. Your pancreas responds by pumping out insulin. Your body handles it, but that spike and crash cycle leaves many people feeling a dip in energy and a craving for more carbohydrates within a couple of hours. Whole grain bread does this more slowly, but it's still happening. By the end of the first week of daily bread eating, something more subtle is occurring in the gut itself. Gliadin protein interacts with cells lining the intestinal wall and triggers the release of a protein called zonulin. Zonulin is essentially a gatekeeper. It regulates the tight junctions, the microscopic gaps between intestinal cells that control what gets into your bloodstream and what stays out. Elevated zonulin levels cause those gaps to widen. Researchers call this increased intestinal permeability. You may have heard it called leaky gut. In people with genetic sensitivity, this happens more dramatically. In others, the effect is mild, but it is measurable, and it happens in response to gliadin regardless of whether someone has celiac disease. At the 2-week mark, if you're eating commercially produced bread daily, something else compounds the problem: phytic acid. Phytic acid is an anti-nutrient found naturally in grains, and in bread that hasn't been properly fermented, it remains largely intact. Phytic acid binds to minerals like zinc, magnesium, and iron in your digestive tract, and escorts them right out of your body before they can be absorbed. This means your daily bread could actually be quietly reducing your ability to absorb key minerals over time. Not dramatically, not overnight, but consistently. By the 30-day mark, the picture depends heavily on what kind of bread you've been eating. Daily white bread consumption correlates with increased inflammatory markers in some studies, not because bread is inherently toxic, but because the blood sugar spikes, mineral blocking, and intestinal effects compound. The gut microbiome, that complex ecosystem of bacteria living in your digestive tract, shifts. Processed bread feeds certain fast-reproducing bacteria while starving slower-growing beneficial strains. Bloating, inconsistent digestion, and changes in bowel regularity are among the most commonly reported symptoms. Some people also notice their skin breaking out more, their energy feeling less stable, and, this one surprises people, mental clarity declining. The gut-brain axis is real, and what disrupts one tends to ripple into the other. Now, before you swear off bread forever, let's bust some myths, because this conversation gets distorted in both directions. Myth 1. All bread is equally harmful. This is simply not true. The research on sourdough bread tells a genuinely different story. Because sourdough fermentation uses live bacteria cultures over many hours, it significantly degrades gliadin proteins and breaks down phytic acid before the bread ever reaches your gut. Sourdough has a meaningfully lower glycemic response than commercial white bread. The fermentation actually pre-digests the problematic compounds, so the delivery mechanism, how the bread was made, matters enormously. Myth 2. Gluten is the main villain. As we've established, the issue is more nuanced. Gliadin is one piece, phytic acid is another. The hybridization of modern wheat is a third, and the elimination of fermentation is perhaps the most underappreciated factor of all. Myth 3. Going gluten-free automatically improves gut health. Many gluten-free products replace wheat with refined starches like tapioca, rice flour, or cornstarch, which spike blood sugar even faster than regular bread and offer minimal fiber or nutrients. Swapping bread for a gluten-free cookie is not a gut upgrade. There are specific groups for whom daily bread consumption deserves serious consideration. People with celiac disease must avoid gluten entirely. For them, it triggers an autoimmune response that damages the intestinal lining. People with non-celiac gluten sensitivity, a real but less understood condition, often experience genuine symptoms from modern wheat. People with type 2 diabetes or insulin resistance should be especially mindful of blood sugar spikes from refined bread. And people with irritable bowel syndrome often find that bread, particularly high FODMAP commercial varieties, worsens their symptoms significantly. So here's the honest, balanced truth. Bread is not poison, but modern commercial bread, eaten daily without thought, is not the neutral food most people assume it is. The science suggests that how bread is made matters as much as whether you eat it. A slow-fermented sourdough made from ancient grain varieties is a genuinely different biological experience for your gut than a commercial sandwich loaf engineered for shelf life. The problem was never carbohydrates. The problem was the industrialization of a food that once required patience, time, and live cultures, and the quiet removal of all three. The real question isn't whether bread is good or bad. The real question is what has been done to bread between your great-grandmother's kitchen and today's grocery store aisle, and whether your gut was ever given the chance to keep up.